Hello, welcome to Headlines. On what is the first trip to Syria after the oust of Bashar al-Assad, a Russian delegation, including Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Bogdanov and a Kremlin Special Envoy Alexander Lavrentiev, arrived in the capital Damascus for bilateral talks, as Moscow is believed to have been working very hard to secure the future of its critical military bases in the country. Earlier this month, it was reported that a treaty extending the Russian Navy's lease on the Syrian port of Tartus for 49 years, signed back in 2017, had been unilaterally terminated by the new administration in Damascus, with this being largely interpreted as Russia losing the use of its naval base and the end of its permanent presence in the Mediterranean. However, it's worth remembering that in the immediate aftermath of the fall of Bashar al-Assad, Russia resolved to relocate its troops and assets from all over Syria to its main hub at Khmeimim Air Base near Latakia, with no indication given as to imminent full-scale evacuation. It has also been suggested by some that Syria's de facto leader, Ahmed al-Shara, might have requested that Moscow should hand over Assad and his close aides during the latest discussions held with the Russian delegation. Joining me today, Dr. Melih Demirtas, former Turkish diplomat and researcher at Cappadocia University, joining from Nevşehir, Turkey, and Mr. Nikola Mikovic, a Serbian analyst and journalist, joining from Belgrade, Serbia. Welcome to both of you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Amashov.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Demirtas, Turkey is very active in Syria, has been very active from the very beginning. US officials arrived in Damascus on late December, I think on the 20th of December, for the diplomatic mission. French and German foreign ministers met Syria's de facto rulers in early January of this year, but the Russian delegation has arrived only recently, in fact yesterday. What does underpin this belatedness in the first place? And are we right to assume that the whole discussion there is going to be based on the future of those military bases?
Yes, thank you. The logical move, I think, from the Russian side, we expect this move, because from the first days of the crisis, I mean, I call it maybe crisis, because this domestic affairs changed in Syria really in a very fast terms. And we can see that the Russian maybe government will take an action very immediately. And we can see that this action will come in 1 month, maybe in 1 week, in 2 months. But now we see that a very experienced diplomat is now arriving to Damascus. So, yes, the Russian side, I think, demanded today, as very rational diplomats do. I mean, since, as you said, last month, many diplomats have already visited Damascus' new government. I mean, Mr. Shara, the new high representative of Syrian Democratic Forces. And now Mr. Bogdanov, a very experienced diplomat, maybe demanded some legitimate rights from the Russian side. I call it legitimate rights because from the times of the Cold War, as you may remember, from the maybe first periods of the Cold War, we have seen always some intensive terms or intensive level of relations between Syria and Russian military and diplomatic representatives. Now we have seen that Syrian government also demanded that maybe some past failures, maybe some past actions or past sins, we can call it, because as we remember from the Syrian civil war times, unfortunately, Moscow sometimes unlimited support they gave it to some brutal force of Mr. Assad. And still, we must not forget that Mr. Assad, Bashar Assad, is still somewhere in Russia, in Moscow, probably. But still, the new forces in Syria bravely said that maybe the Russian side must give some signals about these past failures because of this intimate relations between the old regime in Syria and Russia. And from the side of Russia, we have seen that of course, the military forces or military presence there is so crucial for the Russian side. We can understand for the national states ideology, there's all the rights, all the agreements we can see by many diplomats, also from Turkey's side, from the United States, and now from the Russian side, we can see that this is a very logical move. We have maybe see in the next step that Turkey will also contribute to this process. As you said, yes, is a very influential actor. We always visit there with all or high representatives, and I think we also will have this positive atmosphere as a contributor between Russian and Syrian sides, and we will see much more stable environments in the coming months, we hope.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Demirtas. Mr. Mikovic, do you think this meeting, which is probably still underway, I think they arrived on Tuesday, received no information about the fact that they left a Syrian capital, could potentially reverse Russia's fortunes in Syria?
According to latest reports, they ended their meeting and they agreed to continue discussions, which means they haven't reached a final agreement. And frankly, I doubt they will reach it anytime soon, if at all, because if reports are correct, then the new Syrian authorities expect Russia to hand over former President Bashar Assad to Damascus, which I don't think will happen, because if Russia agrees to do that, it will send a very bad message to other former autocrats, or however you want to call them, who are currently in Moscow, such as former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych, or even Putin's friend and godfather Medvedchuk. Russia has a history of hosting those dictators and autocrats who destroy their own countries. So I don't think the Kremlin is willing to send Bashar Assad to be tried in Damascus. And if that's a key demand that the new Syrian authorities have, then I don't think they will reach an agreement. Other requests that they might have, I think, are mainly financial. They expect Moscow to pay significant compensations if they want to maintain those bases in Syria. So that's something the Kremlin is likely willing to accept. But if that's not the only request that they have, then I don't think they will reach the agreement. And they will continue holding talks. But as I said, I don't expect that they will reach the agreement anytime soon.
When you compare the reputational moment, necessity of retaining one's reputation by not handing over Bashar al-Assad, and the critical strategic importance of Tartus naval base, would you still say that that reputational moment prevails over that strategic moment?
I don't think it's that critical, because Russia lost its influence in that part of the world. And in order to continue supplying its troops in Syria, it still has to provide certain concessions to Turkey, because its vassals need to go through Turkish territorial waters, through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, which are de facto NATO territorial waters. So in the past, Russia had a lot of issues because of such a position. It managed to supply its troops, but it had to make certain concessions to Turkey, whether it's in terms of energy or other issues, but still it was dependent on Ankara. And given that Assad is no longer in power and the new authorities are definitely no longer pro-Russian, frankly, I don't see the point of preserving that base from a strategic perspective. Now, the Kremlin, of course, has other interests, because it wants to have that base just to continue its subversive operations in Africa and possibly in other parts of the world. But in order to do that, I think it would have to get de facto permission from the West, which means that they will have to negotiate that not only with the Syrian authorities, but also with the United States. And that will be quite possibly part of the upcoming meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So I think they will discuss not only Ukraine, but also Syria and other issues as well.
Thank you. Dr. Demirtas, Mr. Mikovic mentioned about the necessity of some concessions. Turkey could be sort of legitimately expected to get some concessions from Russia. What are those concessions in your judgment? And what are the key priorities of Russia in Syria from your perspective? And what are the areas wherein Turkey and Russia do still have common interests? And what are the areas wherein their interests do not actually coincide, as long as Syria is concerned?
Yes, thank you. As you said, that in the last maybe 20 years, in the last maybe from the coup d'etat, as you may remember, from 2016. Turkey has also seen that the balances, international and domestic balances, can clash between each other. I think Turkey, as a, valuable member of NATO, as a valuable member also Western Alliance, also saw in a different way, in diplomatic and also in domestic way, that the alliance in the other sections, I mean, this section, first of all, with the Moscow, the section with Beijing, the section, of course, with the Turkic world, this also has some important, valuable meanings for Turkish diplomacy or also domestic politics. Because NATO or the relations with the United States or relations with the, of course, European Union countries has some advantages, but also some potential risks for Turkey for longer years. Of course, we made a very important and strong army in our region, but also we had another problem that these terroristic attempts from various kinds of sources, I think from high extremist, high religious, high ethnic, high leftist, rightist, any kind of sources can be found somehow in Turkey's near territory. So we can understand that this collaboration and alliance with the maybe Russian partners can have some positive results in the last years, especially with the positive dialogue between Mr. Erdogan and Mr. Putin. I think first of all we saw it maybe in the crisis in our near region. I mean in Ukraine first, for example. Please remember the near attempt of Istanbul, as Mr. Putin always repeated that. Because of this Ukrainian crisis, so turned to be a bigger issue. We just tried to solve it just in Istanbul, as you may remember, before all these lives and all these territories are demolished. Actually, Mr. Trump now repeats these words, and we hope that Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin will come together very soon. As my colleague from Serbia said that, yes, we hope that they will discuss the Ukraine crisis, but also the Syrian crisis. But I think these crises are interconnected between each other because Mr. Putin now takes care of his near abroad, the famous near abroad, much more than maybe he done it before, because the crisis is also huge a bit for Moscow now. I mean, the Ukrainian crisis, it can affect also the relations in the near abroad. I mean, Georgia, in maybe Central Asian countries' relations. He can also turn his rational diplomacy. Please not forget that Russian diplomacy is really a skillful diplomacy, like Mr. Bogdanov maybe is a representative of this tradition, I mean, in Syria today and yesterday. Now we can understand that this diplomacy also see this maybe destiny, positive destiny nowadays in his near abroad. I mean, Syria, it's now the near abroad of Russia. I'm not sure about it. As my colleague again in Serbia said that, yes, for now, but maybe for a little period, maybe Russian diplomacy can skip this Syrian axis for a while. It is not about skipping all this military presence, you can understand, but they will not maybe respond so harshly. For example, they will not respond to this new rebel forces. I mean, they are now the legitimate governments so harshly like they did in the Bashar al-Assad's regime. I mean, please do not forget that they also bombed many Syrian cities. I mean, the rebel forces or civilian populations, I mean, the Russian planes. Now they did not this same attitude in this geography. Also thanks to the maybe alliance ideology between Ankara and Moscow, but also thanks to the understanding maybe of this quote unquote rational maybe tradesman ideology of Mr. Trump. Is a positive thing. And I will hope maybe, or also area experts will hope, because we must we must make a measurement about this, demolishment of all the territories in our region. This diplomacy must work.
Thank you, Dr. Demirtas. You mentioned that the conflict in Ukraine and the circumstances on the ground in Syria are inextricably connected. I believe Mr. Mikovic, in one of his latest papers, also sort of mentioned, reflected on the self-same point, saying that one of the reasons why Russia was forced to lose ground in Syria was down to the necessity of consolidating its resources in Ukraine. So that was sort of inevitable from Russia's perspective. And Mr. Mikovic, ousted Syrian leader Bashar Assad said very recently that he wanted to stay in the country, in Syria, after rebels captured the capital. But Russian military evacuated him from their base in western Syria. My question to you is, what was the Russian calculation at the time? Because the general perception about Russia, as far as some of the interviews we've conducted here, are very much based on the idea that Bashar al-Assad, as a person, as a political figure, is perfectly expendable. He's not that critical. And bearing in mind that you believe that Russia will not hand him over to Damascus, what is next for Russia in Syria? If not in Syria, where else Russia will try to consolidate its position in order to have a strategic vision for the future, as long as the Mediterranean, the base is concerned?
If not in Syria, then the Kremlin will definitely try to strengthen its presence in Libya. It could try to set up a military base there, possibly even in Sudan. Although, again, in order to reach all those places, Russian Navy would have to go through Turkish territorial waters in order to get out of the Black Sea. And also in the Black Sea, there's a possibility that Ukraine can hit those ships. So Russia's position is extremely difficult. If you remember when Putin came to power, it was 25 years ago, he shut down over the past 25 years all Russian military bases out of the former Soviet Union, excluding the one in Syria. And I think the only purpose for that base was just for the sake of the Syrian civil war itself. I don't see any other reason why would Russia have the base over there. Yes, it used the base to supply its troops in Africa, Wagner troops mostly, for various operations there, gold and so on. But now I don't see the reason why would Russia have that base. From the strategic perspective, of course, the Kremlin is interested in having those bases and to do operations that I mentioned in other parts of the world. So if the new Syrian authorities definitely say no, then they will try to establish a military presence in Libya and also in Sudan, if possible. Although I think both options are equally bad. Russia, in my opinion, will try to just preserve some influence that it still has in the post-Soviet space. And in other parts of the world, in order to increase its military and political presence, it will have to make significant concessions to the West because it's de facto isolated now. And in order to reach those places, it has to, as I said, to go through NATO territorial waters. So its position is very difficult. When you mentioned Bashar Assad, he was widely unpopular in Syria. And it's understandable that Russia and Iran decided to abandon him. But on the other hand, they didn't even replace him with other pro-Russian or pro-Iranian figure. They just allowed pro-Turkish forces to come to power, which is now interpreted as a huge defeat, strategic defeat that both Tehran and Moscow suffered in Syria. And I think it's true. Now the Kremlin is struggling to preserve some kind of influence in Syria, although I think it will be very difficult because the new authorities are quite aware that Russia was on Assad's side, and as my colleague mentioned, that Russia was bombing those rebel forces. They're now in power in Syria, and I don't think relations between Damascus and Moscow will be normalized in the near future. I wrote about that many times. I think Russia, especially Sergei Lavrov, they will in the near future try to offer to the new authorities in Syria to join BRICS, not as members, maybe as an observer state or so. They have a history of doing that with the Taliban. So that's the next move that the Kremlin could take, and it remains to be seen if Syria will accept. But I think that's on the agenda for sure.
Indeed, and also we remember that Russian President Vladimir Putin very recently said that those people who believe that the fall of Bashar al-Assad means the decline of Russian influence or the defeat for Russia are deeply mistaken. Do you believe this is a mere rhetoric and nothing else?
No, it's the other way around. So of course Russia is losing its influence, not only in Syria, but in other parts of the world as well, in the Balkans and South
No, no, no.
Caucasus and Syria.
Yeah, he's saying that those people who believe that Russia lost influence there are deeply mistaken. That's what Putin said very recently. And my question to you, in your judgment, it's a mere rhetoric and nothing else. Correct?
I mean, that's just typical rhetoric. Of course, Russia is losing influence. It's lost. I think it lost influence in Syria and in other parts of the world as well. And that's the result of his so-called special military operation in Ukraine.
I see. And Dr. Demirtas, we know that European Union is considering the possibility of relaxing some of the sanctions imposed on Syria, but they want to distinguish between the Syrian leadership and Syrian people. They say that the HTS should feel the burden, but Syrian people should feel the element of relaxation. What is the Turkish position about the relaxation of sanctions, and to what extent do you think some of the efforts made by European countries could actually militate against Turkish interests in Syria? Because we understand that Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan very recently, a few weeks ago, made a very critical comment about France without mentioning the country, and said that we are going to discuss all of these issues with United States, with no other nation, in many ways, one may say, patronizing the French side in his own subtle way. So there are certain frictions between Turkey and the Western countries as well. How do you see the future of that interaction in Syria?
Thank you. It's also another important side of the discussion, because Syria, as a territory of historical territory, started its journey with under high, of course, we must confess, under high French influence. Because after Ottoman Empire, as you may remember, all the parties, I mean, all the, of course, the global, we can say, or the cultural maybe forces at that time, British, French, and after that, of course, the United States came. And still, we can feel the remnants, maybe the legacy of those times. I mean, the first years or first periods of the 20th century, or the last periods of the 19th century. Still, Syria had some problems, also ethnically, also maybe regionally, but economically. We can say that Syria can maybe solve the issues, first of all, inside itself. Because from the times of the Ottoman Empire, we can see that it's an amalgamation of the peoples, amalgamation of religions. As you may also remember that all these holy religions had some representatives there. Think about Damascus, think about Aleppo. We can understand that, yes. Germans, French, British, all these Western maybe politicians and also companies, they have also some maybe stakes, or they have some maybe voices now in the new territory of Syria, we can understand, but they also want to confess that maybe this new Syrian community must first of all find its own road independently. It is the maybe number one rule for also in Turkish diplomacy, because Turkish diplomacy says always that, of course, we are also different. I mean, between Turkey and Syria, there are about 900 kilometers, borders. There's a very huge, there's a very long border. But still, we have some disparities. We have some different ideas between our governments, between our people. We know that. Although Aleppo or Gaziantep or Hatay, they are so very similar cities, similar communities we have. Still, we must also understand that we have some differences. Also, European Union members must confess that they cannot come in one night, in one day, and they cannot say that we have the money, we have the cultures, victorious, glorious past, from 19th or 18th centuries times, with of course French language or English language or another languages. United States, of course, cultural force or political force is so important. We understand that, but in the time of also this digitalization, the people also knows their own identity. The young generations, especially young politicians now in Syria, they also know that what are the past failures, what are the past, the stakeholders from this Western side. So European Union members are really, having some fast and very positive decisions to lift the sanctions. This is of course, the positive side, because the youngs or the maybe children, first of all, need this support, because in a very devastated economy, first of all, we must gain these young generations. To build a very positive country, a democratic country, you must first of all get the young people. You must first of all achieve this young spirit. I mean, because of this lifting sanctions is important. But as Mr. Foreign Minister Confidant said that, yes, some countries sometimes so feel brave enough with having, of course, some this Western alliance spirit. We can understand that we are also somehow always called as the part of the NATO member country, but we never said that we are all fully supporter of this Western sins. As I said in my first question, that there are some Russian sins in this bombardment times in the Bashar Assad regime, but also we can say that this historical Western understanding of, I will call it maybe domination, colonialism, or whatever you call it, it all must be discussed now in the new regime, in the Syrian population, in the new education system of the Syrian maybe. So we are so ready to be in between as a bridge, like we did with more than maybe 8 million, 10 million Syrian or guests since this beginning of the civil war. And now we took our responsibility, I mean, bravely. And for the new government, I think we will continue this. The German or French or any other European member state can have this constructive diplomacy through the channel of also our foreign ministry. And first of all, of course, Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin can, I mean, such leaders can also have this positive dialogue in this region. Maybe they can come together in Turkey or in other constructive city for a very positive diplomacy, very near future. We hope so.
Mr. Mikovic, Dr. Demirtas mentioned about Western and Russian sins when it comes to Syria. Are there any Turkish sin when it comes to Syria? And could those so-called sins be used against Turkey in the context of EU-Turkey interaction in Syria?
Well, from the Russian perspective, yes, I would say so, especially given that the Turkish shot down the Russian jet. It was 10 years ago, I believe, or in 2018, don't remember anymore. So from that perspective, yes, probably from the perspective of pro-Assad Syrians or those Alawites, yeah, we could say so. But I think now the majority of the population in Syria will be pro-Turkish, because Turkey will definitely increase its influence in the country. I believe that Turkey is the winner of.
Mr. Mikovic, do you believe Europeans are actually concerned about growing Turkish influence in Syria? Because there is an element of competition between different European countries and Turkey. How do you see the future of that competition, which is there, together with cooperation, of course?
Yeah, I think some countries might be concerned, but in general, I don't think the EU will risk jeopardizing its relations with Ankara because of what's happening in Syria. They might hold some summits and discussions about the refugee crisis that could become reality in the future. But generally, no, I don't think it will have an impact on EU and Turkey relations in the near future. And as I said, I think Turkey is the major winner of the fall of Bashar Assad, because the new authorities will they will pursue essentially pro-Turkish policy. Of course, they will cooperate with other countries, with the Gulf nations as well, and with Western countries as well. But I think they will have to rely on Ankara. They will see Ankara as their major partner in the region. So Turkey benefited, and as I said, Russia and Iran, they definitely lost their influence in the country that was under their control or in their geopolitical orbit for many years and decades. That's over now.
Thank you to both of you. Thank you. This was Dr. Melih Demirtas, former Turkish diplomat and researcher at Cappadocia University, who joined from Nevşehir, Turkey, and Mr. Nikola Mikovic, an analyst and journalist who joined from Belgrade, Serbia. See you very soon indeed.